Right. Hey, everybody. Today is going to be Tuesday, October 6th, and we are moving on to our second half of our biomes notes. So if you remember, biomes are going to be our areas of the world where we have certain sorts of climates, which is weather patterns, like how much rain that they get, for example, or their average temperature. And they're also going to be located on a specific place. And as we've probably gathered by now, it's usually on a specific area of latitude. So there's going to be one that's near the equator. There's going to be one that is a certain distance away on either side. So we are going to get back into that. And we really covered the first two and what a biome is in the beginning, right? So we didn't get very far. Today, I'm going to have some note slides for you. Once again, it's up to you. If you want to print these note slides out and then fill them in, it'll probably be easier that way. If you want to take notes just by hand and with the slides, remember you can always pause and take those notes, or you can use your knowledge to try to answer the exit tickets. Okay, look at that, I have my lights turned off behind me here. So I'm going to go really quickly here into our screen because then we don't have to worry about lighting. Yay. Okay. So we have today's warm up and exit ticket are posted here. I think we should have gotten that done before, right? You can, let's see. We talked about how animals like camels and kangaroo adapted to hot desert temperatures. How might animals adapt to living in very cold conditions? So what might they do in order to really make sure that they can survive that harsh cold? So I'm interested to see what you can come up with, okay? So we have, I believe, right, so this is where we ended off last time. Perfect. Mr. Plug, you're a rock star. Okay. So our next biome, this is where your notes should start. Our next biome is the taiga, which I think is cool because it sounds like one of my favorite animals. And that's how I remember it, is a tiger. Tigers do live in this biome usually, especially the Siberian tiger, which is in Russia, which is in this area. There are other ones like the Bengal tiger. They actually live in hotter climates, but that's how I remember it, is because they have tigers there. They also call it a northern coniferous forest. And a northern coniferous forest, or a northern coniferous tree, can really be described by trees that look like this. And we're going to describe what that is in the beginning. Now, there is one thing that you should realize, and you probably saw it on this map. It's only in the northern hemisphere, okay? It really goes from, in the southern hemisphere where land is, it goes from really hot, and then there is a long separation until Antarctica, okay? The north, our land masses that people and animals live on get very close to the North Pole, so that's why. Okay, so the abiotic factors, what allows life there, what doesn't allow life there. All right, winters are long and cold, right? You go back to these areas, I see Canada, I see a little bit of the northern United States, and I see Sweden and a lot of Russia, okay? So it's very long winters. There's a lot of precipitation there. In fact, almost as much as a rainforest. Problem is that it mostly comes down as snow. Snow doesn't really water plants all that well. When it falls as a solid and stays there, it's just kind of there. So because of that, the soil is going to be very poor in nutrients. It does allow for trees, but that's about it. So it's okay. And if they try to grow anything like crops there, like let's say like corn or something that people eat a lot of, the soil doesn't take to it very well. And you definitely can't have monstrous farm fields like you see like in Nebraska or Iowa. So the growing season there is very short. Okay, so what have the plants done to survive in the taiga? Well, they have conifers. Those are trees that are needle bearing. They don't lose their leaves because they can't go dormant in the winter because they don't get enough nutrients during the hotter seasons. So they are plants that cannot shut down at all. So they keep their leaves or their needles through the winter. And those needles are adaptations so that when they move, the snow can easily fall off of these needles and still allow them to get sunlight. The roots are going to be long, and it's to anchor trees because there's a lot of wind in the taiga, so they need to keep the plants nice and sturdy. That wax on those needles is there to also repel snow and anything else that might be on it, to keep that tree nice and clean, to gather that sunlight. Now, there isn't much sunlight, especially in the winter months, and the poor soil is going to keep plants from growing on the forest floor. So you're basically going to see trees, maybe some small amounts of plant life like this in the hotter season, but for the most part, not a good place for much of anything besides massive trees. Animals, they adapt for the cold winters. They're going to do a few things. They're going to burrow into the ground if they can, because they can find heat down there. They're going to hibernate in the winter because it's so hard to find food. They're going to get a warm coat. In fact, there are even animals around here that do that. Like I saw a coyote the other day, right? I talked about that, and it had its summer coat. It was very thin. If I saw the animal in the winter, it would look twice as big because it had its winter coat. And then it even has natural insulation. Like a good example is a moose. Moose do have thick coats, but they also pack on a lot of fat and they eat a lot so that when the winter months come, they can have that natural body fat to protect themselves. Okay, so we're going to change gears. Before we were in the taiga, which is up here, and in the northern hemisphere, north of 45 degrees latitude. And now we're going to talk about the tropical grasslands. Tropical grasslands, okay, here's the deal. They are called tropical because they are between, mostly, the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. Because they're between them, we call them tropical grasslands. We have grasslands here in the United States, but we call those temperate because they are in the northern section. All right, there are a lot of grazing animals out here because there's a lot of grass. Makes perfect sense. And there's enough rain out there to support tall grasses and some trees, but it's not going to be nearly as thick as a rainforest. Okay, there's going to be a rainy and a dry season there. You can have anywhere between 25 to 150 inches of rain a year. It varies greatly. And fire is going to happen a lot because when it goes dry, it doesn't take much for something to light some grass on fire, and it'll clear out lots of areas, return that nutrients to the soil, and then allow those plants to start growing again. All right, what do the plants do? They grow in tufts, first of all. They stick together. That way they can soak up the same amount of water in the same area, but also stay interwoven so that when the winds get high, nothing happens. They're going to be resistant to drought. And a great example of that is this baobab tree. It's got a very thick trunk, and the reason being is because it sucks up as much water as it can while it can. Is almost like a storage device. You could think of it almost like a camel hump. Many plants are going to have thorns, like the umbrella thorn acacia tree, which it needs to keep its leaves in order to get enough sunlight to survive. So it has developed thorns to keep animals from eating it. But there are animals like giraffes that have special tongues that can eat that with no problem. Animals, they're going to adapt for a short rainy season. They migrate to find things when necessary. It's almost like they're nomadic. Because there's limited food, they're going to lead to vertical feeding. And what that means is that taller animals or animals that can climb are going to have a leg up because they're able to find food up in high places. Like that acacia tree we saw, that's a very tall tree. All right, so what are some threats? Invasive species. People are bringing in species from other places, either because they want to try them out in other areas or because they're doing it by accident. There are going to be changes in how fires are managed. Before they were let burn, and now in a lot of cases, people are threatened by them, so they try to put them out. But unfortunately, that throws the ecosystem off balance. They need to have those fires to have the nutrients return to the soil. Now, in a lot of cases, they're in low elevation, and because of that, any sort of rise in the sea level could potentially flood into the land that's there. And if they run out, or if they start to get too scarce in land, animals are going to have a hard time surviving. There's going to be less to go around. All right, the prairie and the steppe. That'll be next. The prairie and the steppe. Just really quickly here, I just want to bump up. Okay. We're on a good pace here. So the prairie and the steppe, you could argue that Minnesota belongs to this biome. I don't think we do. I think that it is near us, but I think we are more of a temperate deciduous forest, especially if you look outside around here. But we do have grasslands just to the south. okay? There's gonna be very high winds here, almost always. That's why there's so many windmills in Iowa. And there's gonna be 50 to 75 centimeters a year. That's only about 30 to 40 inches of rain, not very much. Okay, there's gonna be sod forming grasses. They're not gonna dry out or blow away with wind, much like in the Savanna. Everything grows in a tuft to keep it all together, soaking up that same amount of moisture, keeping you in place. Animal adaptations, they need to adapt to extremes. There aren't forests to protect them from extreme winds or super cold. So they need to grow thick coats in the winter like the bobcat or the Jeffries cat. They need to be able to burrow into the ground and live in that area just like the prairie dog does, right? They need to find a way at any given time to make sure that they're safe when conditions get extreme one way or the other. The last one we're going to talk about is the tundra. My favorite place on earth, Lambeau Field, is called the frozen tundra because it's considered the coldest football stadium of all. And that's a great way to relate this because the frozen tundra is the coldest biome in the world that is not just a pure desert. Okay, there's usually less than 25 inches of rain a year. So obviously, I should say precipitation, right? Because it mostly be snow. So it's a little bit more than a desert, but the temperature is going to be rarely higher than about 10 degrees Celsius, which means at the hottest, we're looking at like 40 degrees. Permafrost, that means on the top, it's going to be frozen almost all the time, which keeps it in place, but unfortunately doesn't allow it to take in water very much. And if there is a growing season, it's very short. What have the plants done? They grow close to the ground. They have shallow roots to absorb limited water resources. And once again, there are high winds here, so they are going to grow together. You can see that tuft of grass down here is a perfect example. Trees that grow there are hardly going to be any. But if they do grow, they're going to be less than a meter. That is about 3 feet. I like this reindeer lichen. It's a good camouflage. It blends in with the snow that's around it, but it's a plant that basically grows like a moss, interwoven together to keep it in place and soaking up whatever little moisture it can get. Animals, how do they survive in these harsh conditions? Well, in a lot of cases, they have smaller ears, right? The more your ears stick out, the more cold they get when it gets cold. So their ears have retracted over time. In a lot of cases, they're going to have thick coats, and they're going to have them permanently all year, right? Because it never gets hotter than 40 degrees. They don't need to have a winter and a summer coat. They need a thick coat all the time, whether it's fur, like the Arctic fox, or it's feathers, like the snowy owl. You're also going to see animals like grizzly bears that have that thick fur, but they also are very, very large animals with high levels of body fat. And once again, that body fat provides natural insulation to keep them warm. Now, the nice thing is that even though there are some visitors, there are a few predators out here. If you're tough enough to make it, odds are you're probably going to be okay. And there is little competition for food because it just is such a difficult environment to live in. But some animals and even some people have found a way to do it. Okay, this is it for biomes. Okay, now we're obviously going to have a few questions on this on our weekly assessment. So make sure that you are getting those exit tickets done because they reflect perfectly what you can expect on those weekly assessments. So we actually have 4 questions today. And for that, I would like you to please number your responses. And here they are. The taiga has a large amount of coniferous trees. What is a coniferous tree? What is another name for the savanna? What is the reason prairie grass grows together tightly like sod? And what is something animals in the tundra have done to adapt to their environment? You need to go back to the video or you need to look in your notes that were given to you. That's totally up to you. But that is all I have for you. Have a great evening, and we will see you tomorrow. Bye now.